Welcome to the review and launch of the industry's first craft startup and small production wine and spirits distribution playbook created by industry experts for you. Again, welcome today to the over 500 attending this live session. It's been 1 year exactly since WSWA launched Access, a program that has brought together some of the most exciting artisan wine and spirits labels in the US and matched them up with wholesaler advisors, experts on getting craft brands to market. Today, you will hear from several craft brand representatives and wholesaler advisors who, along with their entire WSWA Access team, were responsible for all the content contained in this playbook we have published today. And I want to congratulate the entire team. This playbook is the first of its kind, and it will help demystify wine and spirits distribution, as well as provide the craft community with a roadmap, regardless of what stage the wine and spirits brand is currently sitting in, regardless of how many gallons you produce, regardless of where you're located or who you know or how much money you have. The WSWA Access Playbook is a trusted guide for those of you who aspire to big things in the US wine and spirits marketplace. And we all know there are big things ahead for the craft community. First off, I want to recognize the team. First, I'll start off with our wholesaler advisors. Cheryl Dersey, founder and CEO of Liberation Distribution Incorporated, also known affectionately amongst the craft community as LibDib. Rick Lopez, Vice President, Sales, Great Lakes Wine and Spirits. Drew Levinson, Vice President, Business Development, Breakthrough Beverage Group. Sarah Harmelin, Vice President, Digital Innovation, Allied Beverage Group. Michael Clower, CEO and President, Momentum Beverage Team, Illinois. Ken Rosenberg, Senior Vice President, Supplier Business Development for Wine, Republic National Distributing Company. Ray Lombard, Executive Vice President, Supplier Management and Business Development, Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits. Thank you very much. And on to the craft brand representatives. Kat Hontus, co-founder, 21 Seeds Tequila. Philip Raleigh, Vice President of Business Development, 291 Colorado Whiskey. Scott Neal, Chief Operations Officer, American Freedom Distillery, a wonderful veteran-owned brand. Patrick John Batiste, President, Craft House Cocktails. Bob Gunter, President and CEO, Koala Rum Company. Mimi Buttenheim, President, Mad Rivers Distillers. Sabir Singh, Co-founder and President, Miko Spirits. Alexei Komenenko, owner and founder, My Story Wine Company. Susan Lambert, Chief Marketing Officer, Remington Family Distillers. John Bolello, CEO, Sweet Amber Distilling. Atlas Cheek, Chief Revenue Officer, Treaty Oak Distilling. I want to congratulate the wholesaler advisors and brand representatives on a terrific year. I'm very, very proud and very fortunate to have worked with these folks on this project. I also want to recognize the Access team at WSWA, Christina Sartori, Elena McGonigal, and Emily Magram. Also want to thank the entire WSWA executive team, our CEO and President, Michelle Korsmo, as well as the WSWA board for their continuous support. We really do appreciate it. At this time, I want to turn it over to Dale Stratton and Danny Brager, two SipSource analysts and veteran industry experts who are going to give us a lay of the land and show us what Craft Spirits has today as well as ahead of it. Dale and Danny.
Thanks, Michael. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Congratulations to WSWA for the launch of the Access Playbook. So let's talk about craft spirits for a couple of minutes before hearing from a number of supplier and distributor industry experts. The American Craft Spirits Association just released their annual economic briefing report regarding the craft spirits industry, an industry now close to 2,300 suppliers strong, almost twice the numbers back in 2015. With 7.3% volume growth, which is ahead of the 5% gain posted by spirits overall in 2020, as reported by SipSource, and Dale will review more SipSource spirits data shortly. And that's a representative of a 10% value or dollar gain. So that brings craft spirit share to almost 5% on volume and over 7% on value, compared to 2.2 and 3% respectively in 2015. That's obviously great growth. For aspirational comparison purposes, if we go to the next slide, this is what the craft beer industry looks like in 2020, according to the Brewers Association. Craft beer produced from 8,764 craft brewers accounted for over 12% of beer industry volume and that's up from 5% back in 2010. And that represents a whopping almost a quarter of overall beer consumer dollar spending. And that's coming again from 8,764 brewers in 2020. That was 1,509 back in the year 2000. And there's still significant room for craft brands beyond the top brands within the spirits category. So if we go to the next slide, this is based on Nielsen off-premise spirits data, and it quantifies on the left-hand side the share of spirits accounted for by brands beyond the top 100 in the spirits category. And you can see that number has grown from 21.5% to over 23%. So while there might be some perception that big brands have captured more of the overall market, that in fact is not the reality. And then on the right-hand side, I've broken down the various spirit segments and looked at the share of each segment beyond the top 25 brands in each subcategory. So for instance, brands beyond that top 20 count, beyond that top 25 accounts for 27% of whiskey overall, and so on, as you can see in ranked order. So for most segments, there's an opportunity for craft spirits even when competing with large national brands. Lastly, before I turn it over to Dale, what are some big picture consumer drivers that lend themselves to and reinforce that craft opportunity? So on this slide, the next slide, I've just sort of captured some of the larger big picture and broad consumer drivers operating in many categories today, including beverage alcohol, and highlighted in that yellow or gold some of those consumer drivers that are really fundamental and supportive of the craft community. Consumers are looking for experience. They're seeking authentic brands with authentic stories, and they're very much open, especially younger generation, to exploration and discovery of something new to them. They're seeking flavors. Sometimes those are traditional flavors, but often it's something new and different. And if we go down to the bottom, they're certainly drinking better, if not necessarily more. And we see that in their trading up or premiumization activity. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dale to take the story to the next stage.
Thank you, Danny. I appreciate that. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon. And like Danny, I'd like to congratulate the team on the great tool that they have built here for everybody to use. Next slide, just real quick before we jump into this. And I'm really going to talk more about leveraging data and using data. You know, good strategy starts with good data and turning that data into knowledge, and turning that knowledge into sound strategy is a good path for success. I'm going to show some SipSource data just for everybody on the call who does not know about SipSource. SipSource is aggregated depletion data from the wholesalers that you see listed below. 13 wholesalers currently, that's going to continue to grow. And it's really representative very strongly of what's happening in the marketplace from a volume standpoint, and has great reach across all channels and all premises. The way that it works, these wholesalers share their data. It is then sent to VIP. VIP aggregates the data and attributes the data so that we can cut it in many different ways to look at it. And that data is shared on via the iDig platform that VIP has. Next slide, please. So this is a very standard slide that you're going to see next. That is the looking at, I'm sure we're going to get to there. It is. Thank you. This is really looking at the various spirits classes or categories, if you will. And this is a pretty standard slide that we use. The bars represent share of volume. The dots are representing trend versus the same period last year. And this data is for 12 months rolling, ending October. And we can see here that vodka is by far the strongest category. It has almost a 30 share of all volume that goes out. And I've heard people quote this and look at this as the reason that they're going into the spirits category. You see some very good growth things here. We all know cocktails and premixed cocktails have been really showing strong growth over the last 24 months. But you see tequila also doing very well, and cordials coming back. However, if you cut the data in another way, and when I think about craft spirits, I think about premiumization like Danny spoke about. And on the next slide, what we'll see here is looking at the same data, but looking at it for only products that are sold for $25 or more. So what you see here is a very, very different look at what categories are big and the level to which they're growing. The first indicator here is everything is growing over $25. All spirits categories are doing well. Great sign that is showing premiumization in the category. And if we look at the next slide, you can really see the impact as to what it looks like and what the difference is between total spirits and over $25 spirits. And you see here that vodka share is almost 22% less over $25 than what it is. So when you're building your strategies and you start thinking about where to play, it's really important to understand how big the various categories are for that price tier that you're trying to get into. There is also the element that is about how many players there are in the space. And, you know, as I pick out a couple of categories, the first one, I got the count of items that are in the SipSource database. For tequila, there are 277 items that are over $25 that are within there. The rum category has 633 items in there. And then when I go up and I would jump up to the US whiskey, very, very desirable. And Danny pointed out that that's one of the categories that takes a longer time to get to that high percentage of share. But there's almost 3,000. There's 2,970 US whiskeys over $25. So it's a very, very competitive space. And those are things that you have to consider. The other thing to consider as you start to build your brand, which we'll see on the next slide, do I want to go into the on-premise or the off-premise? And this is just showing the split for the over $25 categories and looking at what percentage of the volume is done in the on-premise versus the off-premise. And you can really see here, and this is pretty dynamic over the last 20 months with the impact of the pandemic. We've seen some changes within this. But you start looking at, do I want to build my brand and build my category in the on-premise? Certainly the tequila category, the gin category, and cordials look like really good places to go do that. Might be a little more challenging if you're in the brandy category or if you're to some extent really in the cocktail category, but we know we're seeing good growth within those areas. So I just wanted to give a couple of examples of how to think about using data and leveraging data to build your strategy and building a strategy that can help you win in the long term as you build out your brands. With that, thank you very much, and I'm going to pass it back over to Michael.
Danny, thank you very much for that data and analysis. Certainly what you presented seems to support the narrative that this is the most dynamic, inclusive, and competitive wine spirits marketplace the world has ever seen. So thanks for that presentation. At this time, I will turn it over to the co-founder and CEO of 21 Seeds Tequila, Kat Hontas. Kat?
Hey, thanks, Michael. It's great to be here, everybody. I have certainly enjoyed my time with this panel and hearing especially everyone's story. And with that, I'll tell you a little bit about my story and really talk about your customer and really understanding who your customer is and how to reach that customer. So quick backstory on 21 Seeds Tequila. I started the company with my sister and my girlfriend. So we are 3 female founders. And really our story starts with wine. So I was a wine drinker, happily. I love wine, actually. And I would drink wine every night. And suddenly one day, it just kind of stopped agreeing with me. I went to my doctor, and on my doctor's recommendation, he suggested that I move away from wine and move over to a distilled spirit. And he recommended I switch to Blanco tequila. So at the time, I was not a big tequila drinker. I found tequila to be quite harsh. And the idea of swapping out my nightly glass of wine for some tequila every night on a Tuesday felt a little aggressive, to be honest. And I thought, I got to figure out something to do to this Blanco tequila to make it really easy to drink. So I love to cook. I started infusing it. And by infusing the Blanco tequila, it completely changed it and almost created a new spirit. And for the next 9 years, it's the story of 21 Seeds took a while to get here, but for the next 9 years, I made this infused tequila for myself and my friends. And what I noticed was my girlfriends in particular were asking me for bottles of this infused tequila. They too were making the switch. They were moving away from wine and champagne, and they were switching to tequila. And they would either ask me for bottles of my infused tequila, or if we were out at a bar or restaurant, they would order tequila, soda, 3 limes. So I noticed this trend that was happening of women in particular who were moving away from wine and champagne to tequila and not wanting to sip it, right? They wanted to drink it as a spritz, easy, kind of like a wine, the way that they were drinking wine. And I noticed this trend happening, and I thought, maybe there's an opportunity here. So it was at that point that I grabbed my sister and my girlfriend Sarika, and we took a walk in the tequila aisle and sort of looked at what was going on. And what we noticed 3 years ago when we came to market, right before we came to market, there were all these new tequilas that had come on the market, much to like what Danny and Dale pointed out, premium tequilas, right? They were all kind of being marketed like scotches and whiskeys that you sip, being marketed to that male consumer. And there was nothing in the aisle that was speaking to that female consumer that I had noticed was drinking tequila, right? Drinking it light in a spritz, not sipping on it, not shooting it, but drinking it, a drinking tequila that you drank like a spritz. And it was armed with that we decided to say, hey, there's a white space here. Let's bring this product to market. Once we did that, we then had to figure out, okay, who's going to buy this tequila? And the good news there was we thought, let's sell it to women, right? That's who had been drinking my infused tequila all these years. And so how are we going to reach this female consumer that isn't being spoken to in the tequila aisle at the time? And there we decided to go where she discovers brands, right? And that's very different than the way that most spirits are brought to market. Traditionally in the spirits industry, they're sort of built in the on-premise, restaurants and bars. You taste a delicious cocktail, you want to go home and make it at home, right? And we were thinking, you know what? Women actually don't really discover brands in bars and restaurants. They discover brands in what we like to call this outer premise, this digital landscape, right? Where they read about brands or they get friend recommendations. So whether they're reading about it on Pop Sugar, Well and Good, R29, Goop, Bustle, those are the media online properties where they're reading and discovering brands, or they're getting friend recommendations through Instagram, Facebook, sharing recipes, cocktail recipes on Pinterest, all digital, right? That's what you're hearing. This is this outer premise. That is where we went to let her know about who we were and that we were available and our easy at-home cocktail recipes, and drove all of the awareness building piece of our brand online. And that was because we really had a very clear understanding of who our consumer was and how to reach her. And that's the thing I want to impress upon all of you. When you are starting a brand, you heard the numbers. There's over 2,000 suppliers, right? There are, in my category, over 275 tequilas, right? That are out there in that over 25 price point. How are you going to stand out? We want to believe that consumers have endless pockets. They don't. They're going to buy you instead of something else, right? So you have to be very clear on who is your customer? How are you going to reach them? And what makes you different than that other brand? Why aren't they grabbing that brand? And the only way to do that, especially as a new brand with limited marketing dollars, is to be hyper focused. You have got to know who your customer is, write up a whole narrative on them, know exactly like what are their other interests, and go there, reach them where they are, show up where they are. And that's how you're going to let them know, about your brand in an affordable way. Because as a small brand, you too have limited marketing dollars. You don't have, you don't have Diageo dollars. So it's really important to use those effectively. And the only way to do that is by knowing who they are. The other thing I want to just point out is, we had no idea there was a pandemic coming. We're not that smart, right? We couldn't have predicted that. But coming out of that pandemic, so we were online reaching our consumer. Coming out of this pandemic, you have to have a digital footprint, a digital presence, right? This consumer now, the first thing they think of, they've been trained now to discover brands, buy brands, spirits even now, before you couldn't do it. Now you can. They're doing everything online. So it is so important to have a strong digital presence. You cannot launch a brand today without a strong digital presence. The first thing a consumer is going to do when they discover your brand, wherever they discover it, is Google you. and find out who you are. Do you look legit? What's the brand telling you about that? Do I see myself consuming that product? Right? So those are all things you have to think about. And I can't think of a better way to sort of transition to the next person I'm handing this baton off to talk about the next piece of this playbook than this exact concept. I'm going to pass you all over. That's my time. I'm going to pass you all over, though, to Sarah of Allied Beverage, who was our very first distributor who signed 21 Seeds on. So before that, we were indies. And then along came Sarah from Allied, who's in New Jersey and has been an incredible partner for us. And we were thrilled to be onboarding with her. And I want to just pass the baton on to her so she can continue to talk to you about digital and other things. So thank you all for the time.
Thank you, Kat, for that great transition and introduction. It's been a great 2.5 years working with you. Can't believe it's been that long now. While prepping for this webinar, Kat actually reminded me of the quote that was flashed on the screen as she spoke, which is also on page 26 of the playbook. When I was first introduced to her and the brand, I got it. You know, I just got it right away. I knew who she was and what they were as a brand before shaking Kat's hand or having a conversation. This is because of the website, as she referred to. Their branding, use of digital assets, and content on the website was so clear that it just worked. And you really need both. You really need this to succeed both on and off premise. As retailers and owners also have access to Google, and an asset, a logo, or branded lifestyle image may be their first real impression of you. This quick identification is especially key these days when the on-premise sector is extremely stressed. We've all heard about the labor challenges and shortages that are facing the industry today. So the quicker your message gets to the receiver, the better. With that, I'll go on to lay out 3 key points of guidance to make your on-premise approach as strong as it can possibly be. First, per the above, use all things digital to speak to overwhelmed on-premise buyers. Please remember that people are out and about again. So in addition to being short-staffed, restaurants and bars are just busy. This is a good thing, but again, awareness is key. All that digital talk said, you still have to go to the account in person. Nothing helps sell a new brand better than feet on the street. In fact, ensuring that you have a representative to solely focus on your brand in that market might be the difference between a distributor picking you up and adding you to the portfolio and not. I think most people know by now that you cannot rely solely on your distributor sales reps to do all of the sales, as they have many other brands to focus on and maybe a limited bandwidth. Given everything, the general cordiality guidelines for any meeting are still relevant and extra important. These include, but are not limited to, making an appointment with the account. But remember, don't go during lunch, dinner, or really after dinner either. Be on time, but be flexible as things always come up. Present yourself as an extension of the brand, should go without saying. Be precise and be cognizant of the current environment, something that might be reiterated a lot these days. Secondly, know the difference in how to approach an on-premise account versus an off-premise account or buyer. A more personal, less aggressive approach on the on-premise tends to help. On-premise is about relationships. So establishing that relationship should be the first goal of your first meeting and sampling. Dale showed a few examples that, on-premise is where brands are made, can be one of the best places where brands are made. So, and you want them to support and share your story in the way that you intended it to be. Hence, the building of the strong long-term relationships goes far. So when approaching an on-premise account, it's good to know the demographics of their customer. As Kat said, know your customer. And it's a lot easier to identify and pinpoint in the on-premise than it may be for a general retail store. Also know that tastings and promotions are handled differently and usually less formally than in a store. But that staff training is crucial for the same reasons as I've stated. You're turning your baby, your brand over them to sell. So you want them to sell it in the way you want them to sell it. And my last piece of advice, something learned on the job and maybe not spelled out in a handbook per se, is managing expectations, managing your own expectations. And in this case, I refer specifically to menu placements. Probably not something to expect upon your first couple meetings, but again, goes back to relationships. A new menu placement for a new product is really an opportunity to be substituted by a more established brand. So how do you get noticed off the back bar? This goes back to some of the best advice my colleagues and I have shared with you or will share with you today and in the handbook. First and foremost, you have to have a label that gets noticed and stands out. And then the relationships, again, you have to know your bartender. He or she is going to be your best salesperson and therefore should be your best friend in the on-premise. Once you go through a couple dozens, hundreds of cases organically and the relationship's established, they may reconsider putting you on the menu when it's time. So have patience and earn that slot. Finally, remember that we don't truly know what the on-premise space will look like in this new world as it's still coming back and evolving. So be open, be flexible, and be yourself. With that, I'm proud to turn it over. Great transition from one of our now more veteran craft brands to one of our newer, more successful craft suppliers, John Bolello of Sweet Amber and Blackened.
Thank you, Sarah. And good afternoon, everyone. My name's John Bolello. I'm co-founder and CEO of Sweet Amber Distilling, makers of Blackened American whiskey. So a bit of background on developing and launching our brand. Several years ago, Metallica, the band, decided to create an American whiskey as an additional way to connect with their fans. These guys were masters of craft, of course, music, and to be taken seriously in a crowded field, we knew we needed a master of craft in American whiskey, and that undoubtedly was Dave Picaro. So we set up a meeting with Dave out in San Francisco, and it took us all of about 10 minutes to convince Dave to join us, in the sense that unbeknownst to me and perhaps many of you, Dave was a huge Metallica fan. So 10 minutes later, he signs on board, and he basically asked the first question, which was, what is it that you're looking for? And I said, Dave, you're the guy. You're the Johnny Appleseed of American whiskey. What I want is an awesome whiskey. What that is dependent on you. So he had a blank check in hand, not exactly, but he went about crafting Blackened. So, you know, while the bandmates were intimately involved in all aspects of brand development, the whiskey, as I stated, was Dave's creation. And in fact, when Dave first met the band, James Hetfield, the lead singer, was basically said, look, we know music, you know whiskey, and we want the best. And with that, Dave put a big smile on his face and went to work. Having said that, Blackened American whiskey was launched in September 2018 and is now in all 50 states and Canada. So I want to give you some examples of how your brand can stand out in a crowd, whether your partners are Metallica or, for that matter, you've got, like Kat, just have a great idea that was born out of necessity. You want to always look like you're punching above your weight. As small as you be, even before you launch, you want to punch above your weight as much as possible. And that may be in the digital space, that may be in the event space, it may be in the marketing space. The entertainment scene, having recently returned from the COVID hiatus, means concerts, festivals, sporting, and other events present a great opportunity for craft and startup brands. There's a hell of a lot of bandwidth out there, and you can get involved through those that you know. So you obviously you want to hit up your contact list first and dig through who you may know. For example, you know, one of the benefits that we have in partners with Metallica is they are our titans of the music space, and therefore when it comes to festivals or, you know, concerts, venues, etc., there's, you know, being the top metal band in the world gives you a little bit of exposure and the ability to connect. And we've leveraged those Metallica connections to really promote Blackened in the music space. So for example, with Blackened's, or I should say, excuse me, Metallica's return to touring this past September, it's presented numerous opportunities for us to introduce and sample Blackened to fans. They, since September, there are 4 concerts and 5 multi-day festivals with over 1.5 million consumers exposed to Blackened. Over 200,000 consumers were sampled. So, and as was stated earlier, liquid to lips is critical. We all know that we're going to launch the best product we can, and getting it into the consumer's mouth is really critical. This was a great way to do that. Additionally, one of the things that really benefited us too was, you know, there's always presenting sponsors. And in our case, all of these Metallica shows and or festivals were promoted with, presented by Blackened American whiskey. So whether it was the tickets or, for that matter, social media exposure, promotional ads, posters at shows, etc., it was quite prominent that Blackened was the presenter. In addition to that, and probably the largest benefit here, was at these festivals and concerts, we have a Blackened bar. And that gives us, which features not only merch, but signature drinks in a signature souvenir cup. And this bar, while quite large and well branded, it also brings in our partners. So there's a lot of signage and photos and so forth of the band, just bringing it all back to Blackened and the experience. These bars will have a menu that offer craft cocktails that are targeted to different segments of our consumers. Everything from something that's an entry level that gives you a little bit more sweetness, or for that matter, Blackened on the rocks or with a drop of water. So a lot of different ways that we can really get out there. And while obviously our situation is focused on music, you may have lots of other opportunity that's focused on your brand or your founders. So having all this exposure and having this liquid to lips is translated into significant on and off-premise growth by way of consumer demand, with our distributors playing a key role in circling these events with activations, tastings, and features both on and off premise. It's really kind of surrounding the immediate area, and it really does rub off. What I want to get back to is whether you're in music or whether it's filling a need, look at every way that you can to promote what is unique about you. So I'd like to now move to some comments I had made in the playbook with regard to pitching your prospective distributor. So now you got the distributor's attention and you move to what I call the inverted pyramid, where you start broad and you talk about the category, the target consumer, the market dynamics, etc., in the market you're pitching. So whether that's the state of New York or a county in Maryland, you want to be specific to that state. And the specifics are, and then start with move to the specifics of how you see your brand as part of that mix and how you specifically intend to stand out and build your brand. Because as we've talked about before, and Sarah just mentioned, initially, you're going to be doing all the heavy lifting yourself. So the fact of the matter is you need to know what you're bringing to the table and share that with your distributor partner, and that often can make the difference. So in closing, I feel this playbook is a really great roadmap. All of us in a startup are going to make some mistakes, but hopefully this is a roadmap that helps you in developing a brand with aspirations towards success And it gives you some insight with the goal of avoiding common missteps. Like I said, you're gonna screw up, but hopefully we've given you some opportunity here to learn from our mistakes and thereby giving you a better shot at earning a coveted distributor partnership. So thank you all. Best of luck to you all. And I'd like to close specifically with thanking Michael and Christina and Emily with WSWA, and certainly all the panelists that I've worked with. I really enjoyed the process, and I hope we can continue to bring great ideas to those of you taking the dive into the deep end. So now what I'd like to do, please, is move over to introduce Rick with Great Lakes Wine and Spirits of Michigan. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So far, everything I've heard is very topical and very accurate, and I agree, especially with most of the things that Sarah pointed out. How getting your brand ready to go to the market, how to sell it once you get into a market. But what I want to touch on today is how you prioritize which markets you're in. The United States is pretty big, and each state has its own idiosyncrasies, of course. I have a friend from Europe who says it's like 50 different countries trying to sell to your country. So some of these states have fairly easy access. I don't know all the states. I know Michigan fairly well. I don't know the rest of the country at all. But I'm pretty sure it's fairly easy to bust into Chicago, for example. And I think it's probably a little bit more burdensome to bust into Utah. And I understand it's a little bit tricky to get in there at first. So factor those things into your decision as to where you want to go. You start developing your brand. One of the easiest hacks is to start local. Excuse me, I mentioned that in one of our previous conversations. Selling local, especially for spirits, is very easy. Michigan craft spirits, our major grocery stores have sections that are dedicated just to Michigan spirits. Michigan wines also have their own section, their own loyal following, but spirits in particular, people have really jumped on. Excuse me. So if your spirit is made in Utah or Colorado or New York, that's going to be your base. That's where you should start. Then beyond that, be strategic. Again, some markets, everyone wants to be in California, New York, Texas, Florida, Illinois. Those are the largest markets in the country, but they're also pretty hard to bust into. Everybody's there. So you're just, part of the scene. In smaller markets, sometimes you make a bigger splash, and you can be, sometimes some of your competitors aren't even there. All the big brands are there, but sometimes it's a little bit easier row to hoe if you're in a B market, so to speak. Michigan's not considered a top 5 market. We're a top 10 market, I believe, but it's, I think it's less crowded here than it is in some of the larger markets. So it's sometimes a little easier to start places like that. In addition to local, the other thing that kind of trumps a lot of things is relationships. If you happen to be a California vintner and you have friends in Illinois or Indiana that you have relationships with and loyalty from, that kind of makes sense to ship your product there because you have someone that will look out for your brands. If you don't, it's much harder to just have this patchwork quilt. In our case, we have some brands we represent that are in, excuse me, like 7 or 8 other states as they're new and starting out, from Texas to Iowa to Michigan to Maine, because they know people there. But it's kind of a scattershot approach. You definitely want to have some kind of logic to how you're going to go out to the market, especially if you want to travel. It's much easier if you, again, are a West Coast brand and you have your brands starting to be distributed on the West Coast, and then in Nevada, then in Arizona. It's easier for you to travel there and help usher your brands to success. If you have to go from Maine to Texas to Utah, it's a little bit more difficult and more cumbersome. What else would we talk about? As far as at the account level, once you are into a market, again, Sarah touched on a lot of this, but make sure you use the same sort of logic as you're trying to figure out which type of account you want to be in. Be realistic as to where your brands belong, whether these are spirits or wines. Everyone wants to be in the high profile, high volume restaurants, but that's where everybody wants to be. So again, you're gonna have a lot of competition. You're gonna be swimming upstream. And sometimes you're better off going to some of the second tier restaurants where they have more time to talk to you. They expect less support, and you can kind of pave your own way with those accounts. Again, basically the secret is to have a plan and have a strategy. Another thing when you're talking on the account level is, like I said, be realistic as to where your brand belongs, but do your homework and make sure you're not presenting your product where it doesn't fit. We have a lot of Italian restaurants in Michigan that have exclusively Italian wine lists. And I've actually had some suppliers say, well, let's go in there and talk them into carrying this California Cabernet anyway. And I think that's a bad strategy. Maybe after you've got penetration elsewhere, you can do that. But that's not the way to start. We actually have a restaurant, a very important restaurant in Michigan that refuses to carry Chardonnay and Cabernet. He thinks everyone else carries Chardonnay and Cabernet, so why should I carry that? And I've had a half a dozen suppliers say, well, let's go in there, I'm going to change his mind, which we usually discourage because I don't want to spend that political capital, number one, and number two, I know he's going to fail. So that's probably not the right approach to take. But the bottom line to this is to have a plan, have a strategy, use some logic, and it'll get you in play much quicker, and it'll save you a lot of money. So I'm going to hand it off now to Ray Lombard, who is EVP of Southern Glacier Wine and Spirits Craft Division. So Ray, it's all yours.
Thank you, Rick. So from an off-premise standpoint and strategy, nowadays there's a lot of synergies with what you would do in the on-premise. And you've probably heard several times as far as a digital strategy. And the number one rule is engage digitally, leverage social media. Gone are the days where you needed a multi-million-dollar budget to buy print ads in magazines or radio time or be on television. A little creativity and access to, well, my phone's not popping up there, but access to data and insights and so forth allows you to create a platform that educates people. Nowadays,
let's move on, and we'll come back to Rick to Ray when he joins. Next up is going to be Drew Levinson, who will speak about smart business for craft.
Could you hear me?
Oh, there you are, Ray. We couldn't. All right. Sorry, we thought we lost you.
No, I could see myself speaking, but everybody else was frozen. Apologies for that. So I'll take it from the top. So engage digitally is something that's come up several times, whether it's on or off premise. So for the off-premise, just like in the off-premise, engage digitally. Leverage social media. Gone are the days where you need multi-million-dollar budgets for television, radio, or print ads. Nowadays, with some creativity and the right product proposition, you can deliver content on online where your buyers, bartenders, or end consumers could learn about, as they're researching categories and brands, they could learn about your brand. That'll help them make more comfortable decisions once they go to the point of purchase. Something else that's very important is work with your distributor. Distributors now have strong B2B platforms, such as SG Proof, for example. Platforms such as those has the buyers actually actively shopping and learning about categories with content that is provided within the B2B platforms. And don't forget about the B2C platforms as well, because that's very important, which leads us to, work with the local licensed retailers who connect digitally, who have a shipping program, who have a local delivery program in a 3-tier local compliant manner. That's also critical. Been surveying across the country all week long, and it's amazing walking into stores more and more, from 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the section that they're handling for online sales or for local deliveries, those sections within stores have grown exponentially. They even have, parking spots reserved right now for those services. And it's amazing, it's carts at a time that are being rolled out. So do engage your local customers. establish a relationship. Something else that's come up in this in this presentation several times is the word relationship. So do establish that relationship with the buyers, with the store owners, and so forth. They'll be comfortable promoting your brand and growing your brand, as well as getting it out there. And last is the liquid to lips, which liquid to lips are important wherever you have the opportunity to taste, to sample, to host a dinner for retailers, to host dinners for that retailer's customers where legal. I highly encourage you to do so and educate the trade and the consumers on your brand, because that goes a long way. That your best chance of getting an impulse or immediate sale is with that sampling opportunity. That's very important. And right now, if you're those of you in the audience, if you're considering a craft startup opportunity, it's an exciting time. As you saw in the figures at the opening, it's an exciting time to be in this business. Have fun and be a part of what's a truly diverse and inclusive segment of the industry. With that, over to Drew Levinson, who is the VP of Emerging Brands at BTB.
Thanks, Ray. I appreciate it. Again, thank you to WSWA for your continuing support of this category, the emerging brands category. And it's been really exciting to work with this group and continue to push forward in this space. Over the past 25 plus years in the industry, I've had the opportunity in a variety of roles, whether it was operating the Bolello beverage program or throughout my years with Breakthrough Beverage. And most recently in the last 5 years, overseeing our Trident emerging brand strategy. We've had a great perspective and opportunity to help brands build. And Ray, you're right, it is an exciting time to be working with these type of brands as they go through that incubation process. So today I'm going to kind of take a step onward from a lot of what the previous people have spoken about, really understanding, is your brand in a good space for growth and ultimately scalability? Because that's the aspiration for most entrepreneurs and brand creators and developers. One of the first things we do really is we have that first interaction with a brand is try and understand truly what that brand owner's aspirations and goals are. And really look at them in maybe a 6-month time period, of 1 year, and all the way through 3, even 5 years down the road. Where do they intend to be? And I've had brands tell me, we just want to be a really strong regional brand, Drew. We want to do well in our area of the country. And I've had other brands tell me, Drew, we want total global dominance. And we as a multi-state wholesaler appreciate both sides of those and are willing to work with you if we understand where that aspiration is going. And some of the first places though we need to start is at the beginning. What's your product? What are you selling? It's a given this day and age that you have great juice and a great packaging, that your packaging tells a great story. If you're not getting past that phase, you're best to take a hard look at it and make sure you're testing and make sure that it truly it represents what you're trying to achieve and tells your story well. Then you're looking for, does it work out on the shelves? Does it work behind the bar? Is it store friendly, even wholesaler friendly in how we move the product? Or is it going to break easily as it starts to grow in scalability and you have more cases going out in the marketplace? Make sure that your product is favorable to the logistics of our industry and making its way ultimately to the end consumer. Another thing we're looking for is, what's the name of the product? What's the easy access consumer name? If you think about it, any global, any iconic brand in our industry has always flown off the tongue very easily when you're in a loud, busy bar or trying to tell your friends what you're drinking these days. If it doesn't flow easily off the tongue, you might want to rethink the name of your brand and what your brand represents, if ultimately a scalability piece is what you're looking for. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the financial components of this. To scale in this day and age is expensive. There's no other way around it. It's been an arms race among brands for the last decade, and the tremendous amount of outside money and influence that has gotten into the beverage alcohol space has challenged and created an expensive place to operate. So be ready, be smart with your plan, and a financial plan that is able to support ultimately your goals and aspirations for the long term. Now, when we talk about the plan, and Kat did a great job of really, hitting on the SMART plan at the beginning and knowing who your consumer is and how do you reach that consumer. And several of the panelists have given you great insights into reaching that consumer, whether it's through a digital or how you even go into the marketplace specifically with them. John did a great job of talking about how he and his brand really, hit on and focused on who they wanted to be as a brand. For us as a wholesaler, the next piece is to take that plan and really phase it out. As I said, it's expensive, and it's tremendously expensive if you have a national plan that you want to roll out at one time. Very few brands have the capabilities, the resources to do that all at once. Most brands operate in a small localized area and work their way from that local market outwards. And we appreciate that. We want you to own your local market. I think Rick referenced that, really develop that market locally, and then begin to build your phases outward. We as wholesalers are great at following a plan. We can execute that plan. If you say we're going to do 3 markets in the first quarter and then 3 more markets in Q2, we're great at that. Where we don't do well, and it will be challenging as you get to the scalability phase, is if you're constantly living in the gray area. If you're constantly changing where you want to expand your marketplace. So be very focused on that plan and how you're going to phase that plan, and ultimately the metrics that we are looking for and you are looking for before moving to larger scale within that phase. So it may be velocity metrics, how much product is actually pulling through, or reorder metrics where we're seeing that demand for the brand and in the accounts that it's in. Each one of those is a stair step towards the larger scalable piece. Couple of watch outs here. One really important watch out for me. I always see brands come to me and say, Drew, we just got an approval for a national account. Walmart just approved us. And we need to open 27 states because Walmart says we got to go to 27 states. Be careful with those. Oftentimes those are licensed to hunts, and each of those markets that you open and don't have a plan for will get very expensive once you get past that first account that you're trying to lock up. Finally, as I'm talking about some of the growth within the markets and owning the markets, continue to build that demand locally. When you think about the dollars spent, I always say that it's 10 times more expensive to get the same output in a new market as it is in an existing market. So make sure that those existing markets are very well hit, thoroughly covered, and you're seeing that velocity and pull-through rate that you would expect before expanding to the next markets. It's tough to skip markets and move on to the next ones without fully bringing them home and doing it in a full and complete sales strategy, whether it's traditional as well as digital and other forms of hitting the marketplace. On this page, you'll see our good friend Jeff Kozak from WhistlePig. And WhistlePig's a really unique story that we've had the opportunity to work with that brand really since its inception. One of the things that they did well in creating kind of that growth plan was that they created demand. So they actually didn't ever have enough product to fulfill what their markets were desired for each and every year. So they always lived on this kind of edge of we're in stock, we're out of stock, we have some products, but it's very allocated. And what that did was create a natural demand and word of mouth that was beginning to get ahead of the brand. And that demand pulled WhistlePig and their brand and their story across the country and across markets over the course of several years. And that is a fantastic way to build a brand, especially in a highly allocated or a more sophisticated aged type products such as whiskeys or tequilas. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem to work as well in the unaged products or the simpler products like RTDs. So be careful with those out of stocks. Be careful with that allocation process as you're scaling up. Finally, as you get to your tipping point, and this is a really important phase for any scalable brand. And I don't think anyone can fully say when it happens, but all of us have worked with enough brands on this panel, and they know when that brand just hits that tipping point. And when it does, the velocities accelerate, the noise accelerates, The people get excited about it. The sales teams get excited about it. The consumers are excited about. This is the time to lean in. This is the time to be ready and have your plan buttoned up. This is the time to make sure your logistics are in good space. Don't get cute with logistics and pickup points and trying to move products to certain areas. Get very streamlined with that, because as the tipping point hits, the brands will accelerate oftentimes ahead of the producers. So this is the time to bring the joy, bring the noise, bring the excitement, enjoy the ride. There's nothing more rewarding as an entrepreneur, and for us as a wholesaler, than to help those brands grow and achieve those aspirations. So good luck to all of you out there that have those aspirations, and we look forward to helping you and working with you in the future. And with that, we're going to send it back to Michael to bring us home. So thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Drew, and thanks to everyone participating today. This panel truly just an incredible one to work with, and the amount of industry knowledge is just incredible. And so for those of you who attended today, this is just a small taste of what's actually in the Access playbook. And so for those of you who have registered and attended, you're going to receive a copy of that playbook that will essentially pop up in your email once you complete the registration. You could also unlock your free copy of the WSWA Access Distribution Playbook at wswa.org/access. I want to take a minute real quick to thank our silver level sponsor, Brand Muscle. More than just a sponsor, Brand Muscle's powerful e-brochure platform has allowed us to share the distribution playbook with dynamic content. So throughout all 87 pages, you'll find this symbol right there, a little play symbol we're all familiar with, and that will allow you to pull up an embedded video, and it goes into greater detail based upon that give it topic or call out. So it's really something that expands the presentation of data and sharing of ideas, as well as gaining more insight, is incredibly dynamic. And so Brand Muscle does this, quite frankly, the best in our industry, and we're really happy and proud to be working with them on this project and others in the future. So we hope you enjoy that. Also, you can download and print the playbook from here once you have downloaded it. And so feel free to share this free resource with friends. And I will tell you this right now, I think the panel summarized this nicely, that you follow the recommendations in this playbook and you'll be ready to pitch any wholesaler in any market in the US. So for those of you, again, as the panel said, congratulations for the WSWA Access Wholesaler Advisors, as well as brand representatives who are not on this panel and will be participating in a Q&A after. That's another follow-up resource that we're going to share with those of you who registered and attended today, a Q&A resource where we're going to dive deeper with some of the brands and some of these topics that are highlighted in the playbook. So again, thanks for attending. Thanks again to the panel, and we look forward to a great 2022. But before then, make sure everyone has a very safe, healthy, and happy holiday, and well in advance, and hopefully a great year for Champagne. Let's have a great new year as well. So cheers, everyone. Thanks for attending.